This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and innovation is hard. Everybody wants to do it, but for every Facebook, there are 10 MySpaces, and for every iPhone, there are 10 Zooms. So we all want to do it, but it's really, really hard. May I suggest a new bestseller from Merle Symes? The Innovation Edge, How Large Companies Lose It and How to Get It Back. Merle's made a career of partnering with senior executives to unlock strategic opportunities in challenging business environments. We're going to talk about what intelligent failure means, why the S-curve paradox is a major roadblock in innovation, and Merle and I will commiserate on our mutual disdain for checking the boxes. Merle, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you for asking. And I want to start by talking about innovation, and not just because it's a title in your book, but I almost feel like innovation is like going to the gym. Everyone feels like they need to go to the gym. It's good for you. But when it comes down to it, you're like, yeah, I just don't feel like it. And I feel like innovation falls in that bucket where everyone wants to innovate. You have the line in the book that, it's from the Moneyball movie, innovate or die. But it's like, why do you think everyone wants to do it, but then it's so hard? Is it almost like that gym mentality where I want to do it, it's just not worth it to me?
It's a combination of it. People may not think it's worth it or whatever, but it's also a lot of it is due to not really knowing how to do it. And to do that, so just to kind of set the stage, I've found a major distinction between incremental innovation and what I call strategic innovation. Incremental innovation is continuous improvement, product line extension, stuff like that. Strategic innovation is, people call it radical innovation, breakthrough, disruptive. All of those I kind of lump together as strategic innovation. And people try to utilize the same management techniques and such as project management techniques that work in their day-to-day project stuff and their incremental strategic stuff, but it doesn't work with strategic innovation, and so that's why they just quite frankly fail, and then they get discouraged, and then they stop trying to innovate.
And could the issue be also, Merle, and this is your expertise, but the idea that there's so much nuance into innovation, where you mentioned like the project management of it, that those two sometimes don't coexist. Because to me, Merle, I'm an old school media guy, so like project management doesn't jive with me, and I'm a kid of immigrants. So to me, when you talk about project management, it can result in a sort of check the box mentality of like, oh, did I do it well? Did I do it great? I don't know. I did it. Check the box. And so innovation is so complex and nuanced. How did those two fit? Because I feel like sometimes that could be like square peg, round hole kind of vibe.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're absolutely right in that. And I was just talking to a manager the other day who was saying, they were actually kind of innovative, but they wanted to innovate, and their boss just said, no, I want you to check the box, to use your term, and we just need to accomplish these things, and we've got to meet our near-term goals, and don't make waves, and please don't bring this up to my boss. So you're absolutely right. There's a lot of, I just want to check the box. I've talked to other managers who are some senior managers who wanted to be a little more innovative, and they had people that came from very large organizations that just said, I just want to put in my hours from 8 to 5, and then I want to go home. I don't want to have to mess with that other stuff. So you're absolutely right. There's just a lot of that check the box mentality.
And how do you think, when you talk to these companies in terms of fostering a culture of innovation? Because like you said, like that gentleman was like, yeah, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to do my job, but I'm 8 to 5, and I'll make sure I check all the boxes. How do you foster that within a company? Because at the end of the day, the company still has to meet their quotas, sell their items, fill in the blank, but then also put that extra layer of innovation. Is that a top down thing, bottom up? Like, what are your thoughts in terms of like when you've seen it work well, how do you get that culture of innovation in place?
Well, it all has to start with the management mindset. If you don't have that, starting with the senior management, if you don't have that management mindset in place, where you're just constantly thinking about innovation, how can we spur more innovation? How can we stimulate more of creativity within our organizations? How can we make sure we're capturing the ideas that are being generated and maybe stifled somewhere? How can we actually start devoting more time to this? It all has to start with the senior management team, and they have to then start building this throughout the entire organization. And it really has to be something where they're living it, they're eating it, they're breathing it. It just really has to start there. Otherwise, you'll never get to the culture stuff, because it just takes such an effort.
And without using too much of a dramatic word, I think when you want to have that culture of innovation, there has to be some sacrifice. Because you mentioned earlier the 9-10 hours in the day. Okay, so if you want us to innovate, we're not going to be able to do some of those short-term things that we are that we are paid for, or stuff that we are judged for when it comes to those one-on-ones at the end of the year in terms of your performance. What's your take on that, about like sacrificing some of that short-term, like like that endorphin of the short term for more of the long term?
Yeah, and you've really hit on one real key. That is, so many of our corporations these days, especially the publicly traded ones, are really deeply immersed in short-termism, and it goes all the way back to their compensation systems and everything else, which is all promoting short-term gains. And so there's no question you have to be able to address that. There's no question you have to train your managers to be able to be both short-term oriented and longer-term oriented. And I tend to use the term, you have to be both value capture, which is today's stuff, capturing what you've invented in the past or innovated in the past, and value creation. What are the things you're doing today that 2 or 3 years down the road are going to result in the growth that you're really looking for? And so I refer to it as almost kind of being an ambidextrous managers. Managers just have to be trained in that, and they have to know that there's an equal emphasis on developing for the future as well as achieving for today.
Hmm. Do you mind role playing with me for a second? Indulge me. Say, because it sounds like you obviously have a lot of experience when it comes to helping managers with innovation. But say I'm your employee, you're my manager, and you come up to me and say, "Hey, Joe, that project that was due today, you missed the deadline. What happened?" And then Merle, I say, "Well, sir, I planned on it, but I've been working on this future innovation project that we have on the side here as well, and that's taking up a lot of my time." How would So if that happens, what do you suggest a manager would react in that situation?
Well, it's always a balance, and there's no question that, if I would be working with that manager and really trying to understand what is eating up their time, and where do we need to shift our thinking, where do we need to adjust our resources, and are we over spending time in certain areas and letting others be sacrificed? It really is a balance. It's not necessarily easy, and managers go through a learning period where you're really learning to balance the two, and knowing when one's got higher priority today, or and the other one's got higher priority tomorrow, and that sort of thing. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but
No, in a way, if I may translate, like you almost have to give grace. Be like, okay, I get it, but let's see what we can do so you can work on that long term stuff but also hitting those short term goals, right?
yes, and that's where uh, most of these management teams really need to reevaluate even their whole compensation systems, their performance review systems, if your whole system is geared towards certain annual goals, and if a lot of their compensation is at risk and it's only based around those short-term goals, well, guess what? You only get short-term accomplishments, and you don't get the longer-term accomplishments. So you really have to, in that performance review at the end of the year, or whenever, how often each organization has it, there has to be an equal amount of discussion about what are we doing to innovate for that's next thing down the road. What's the next paradigm we're going to be trying to move into? And that has to be an equally important part of that conversation in every performance review, not just what you did in the last 6 months to 12 months.
Nice. All right, cool. And we kind of touched upon a little bit of this in the conversation, but in the book, you write about the S curve paradox and how it's a significant barrier for innovation in mature, like older companies. Can you talk about that a little bit? I know we've kind of touched on some of the parts of it, but give me the breakdown on the S curve paradox.
Yeah, it's so most major innovation, most things that companies or businesses are doing that are successful, look like an S curve. They start off slow and then they really hit and it really takes off, and you see that really steep curve. And then it starts to plateau. It starts to level off. And that's where you see a lot of large, mature companies. They've they're living off, quite frankly, yesterday's innovation, but things are leveling off, and all of the emphasis in their business is incrementally improving on last year's results. But it's all about it's all about really just continuation of something that was really innovated some time ago, and it's usually the paradox is at the time when managers are most comfortable because you're enjoying success, you're generating cash, you're living off the successes of the past, you're making your bonuses and that sort of thing. That's the very time when you probably should be most concerned. That's the time when you should be most worried that somebody is working on the next major innovation, the next paradigm that's going to be taking over your industry. And so at the time when managers are most comfortable and really enjoying stuff, that's when they should be the most concerned. And that's the paradox.
Nice. You also write about something called intelligent failure, and Merle, you know me very well, but I am one of my big pet peeves is when you hear all these leaders talk about embracing failure, learn from your failure, but then if one of their employees fail, they get fired. So I always love the speaking of paradoxes, it's like, oh, you can only grow by failing, but then of course if you fail, the leader's gonna be like, okay, you're out. So tell, and obviously there's, again, we talk about nuance. There's nuance here in terms of intelligent failure. Talk more about that.
Yeah, so to your point, I mean, you're right on target. I see organizations where people are encouraged to do things, but then they're penalized if they fail. And it's very common, and I've seen it in a lot of large organizations where it's just presumed you get ahead by not screwing up.
Right.
But intelligent failure, well, so there are some managers that are now kind of progressing beyond that, and you hear this mantra of fail often and fail fast. Well, that's got its head in the right place, but it's still lacking something, because when you just pursue that, what you end up doing is the equivalent of just throwing a lot of stuff against the wall and seeing if what's going to stick. And quite frankly, what it results in is just a lot of failure. Intelligent failure is very different in that you may be failing, but it's with a purpose. You're doing what we call successive, like proof of concept kinds of action steps. And if each one you expect at the end, if it's successful, then that tells you you're on the right path. And then you go to the next step. And if you're not successful, then it's something you designed so that you are actually learning something. So at every next step, at every next what we call proof point in this process, you're always learning. You're either learning what is working, what will work, or you're learning what won't work, and that you need to change direction and rethink things. And so that's kind of a summary of intelligent failure.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, it is funny how, personal growth is so complicated, and I think people sometimes simplify it by. I think there's even books about like embrace failure and love failure. I'm like, yeah, I mean, failure is sort of like a privilege. Like, not everyone can fail. Like, you see major companies like a Meta, they could fail a lot, but since they have built up so much equity, whether it's capital or sweat equity, they can get away with a bunch of failures. Some people cannot. And a
Yeah.
great example of that is, and you talk about it in the book, is Kodak. Kodak for many years was synonymous with photography. And then all of a sudden, the digital photography revolution happened in the late 90s and 2000s. And Kodak is a shell of what it once was. What if you could hop on a time machine, Merle, and you write about this in the book, what kind of advice would you have given Kodak when it came to that innovation breakthrough?
Well, one of as I've read deeper and deeper into that whole case, the interesting thing is Kodak actually saw that digital was coming, and they actually were one of the first ones to develop some digital cameras.
Yeah.
But if you really read deeply into what happened and what stuff, the organization could the existing organization could never break away from that film mindset. And so it always dominated even those efforts to try to go into more of the digital space. And so one of the things when I'm consulting with an organization, one of the things that comes up is this something we're going to pursue within our existing organization, or are we going to have a few people kind of step outside of that and take this on as their job, or do we go to the other end of the spectrum and we make it a complete startup on its own, where it's completely separated from the rest of the organization? And so my general answer to that is the bigger the innovation, the bigger the change, the bigger the shift in paradigm, the more it has to be in a standalone, separate organization. And
Hmm.
so, in one of the when I used to work years ago at Monsanto, Monsanto recognized after a while that it just kept killing all of its new businesses, and so they finally decided to try something different. Where this one technology was a promising technology, another one that was going to be a new business they wanted it to be. They set it up completely separate outside the organization, completely like a new venture. And so and I was moved into the group to help them really shape this. The We were not required to hire anybody or use anybody from inside the Monsanto organization. We weren't required to use the engineering services, which were very slow and expensive and terrible for a startup situation. We could operate strictly as a new venture with Monsanto just being the primary investor. And we were able to be very successful. And within 3 or 4 years, we had taken major market share away from the 800-pound gorillas in the marketplace and stuff. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but the amount of separation. In fact, we've even talked about. I've even been advised organizations where they finally realized they just had to create a wall between these new ventures and the existing organization, because the existing organization, the managers kept trying to suck resources back into their organization. They kept saying, well, no, if we just continue what we're doing, we're going to be more successful than going dealing with all these new crazy things. So sorry
Wow.
for the long-winded answer.
No, I love it, and so much to unpack. It's like, God, I got to try to keep up with you, Merle. It's what's crazy is about history. I think we're all quick to assume, oh, Kodak. The reason they crumble was because they failed to innovate. And like you mentioned, no, they tried. They were probably the first digital camera on the market, so they understood the innovation. They just didn't get it right. Another one that, and I think you referred to in the book, is Blockbuster. People are like, oh, Blockbuster failed because Netflix came around. I'm like, no, a lot more complicated than that. Their parent company was basically using Blockbuster as a slush fund, and all of a sudden, all the capital was getting sucked out of it, and they weren't able to innovate in time for Netflix. So it is funny how I guess it's like the history is written by the winners, but there's so much more to the story of failure for a lot of these companies, isn't it, Merle? And you probably learned a lot about that while writing this book.
Yeah, and you, you always have to be a little careful because you'll see a lot of what I'll call surface analyses of these situations. I really try to always find those sources that really talk to some of the people that were involved and were right in the middle of it and that sort of thing. So I was approached recently about a whole discussion around Intel right now. 20 years ago, Intel was the innovator. They were the ones that, remade themselves as this wonderful chip company. Andy Grove and that whole bunch, they were highly innovative. And they kind of rested on their laurels and lived off of that. And now, 10 years later or whatever it is, NVIDIA's eating their lunch. And they failed to see that next big paradigm. And now they're in a hard scramble to try to catch up, and it's not going well.
Yeah, and it's funny, the NVIDIA example is one of those where it was almost like accidental innovation, Merle, because as most people may or may not know, the chip that NVIDIA created was for gaming. And they created it long before this AI revolution, and we're going to get to that in a second, but they created long before, and then it just so happened that while people were building these LLMs, they realized that the GPUs that NVIDIA was creating was perfect for AI servers. And then, so in a way, you can kind of almost defend, the Intel situation, because it's like, who knows? Because had that accidental, that like serendipitous moment happened, it happened for NVIDIA, maybe Intel would have been able to innovate as the AI revolution was happening, right?
It's very, very possible. Very possible. You touch on a very interesting point, and you talked about how to change the culture and change the mindset of the organization. There's tons and tons of opportunities that are popping up every day, and organizations just miss them. If you don't have your entire organization on the alert, on looking for that next innovation, looking for opportunities, being constantly opportunity oriented and that sort of thing, they'll miss them. And so there these kinds of situations come up all the time. But there's something I talk a little bit about in the book called sagacity, where people are actually alert and looking for those kinds of things. And that's the difference between an innovative culture and one that's not innovative. If you're ever around successful serial entrepreneurs, they're constant, everything that they see, they're thinking, is that an opportunity? Is that an opportunity? They're just constantly thinking in terms of opportunities. It's roughly equivalent to some, I've had the pleasure of working with some major inventors, and everything they see, they're thinking in terms of, is that something that could be turned into another invention? It's just a constant process. It's not just it's not just you happen to stumble on something. You had to be mentally looking for it as well.
Yeah, and something analogous to that, and I always talk about like changing your mindsets to match, is the mindset of a stand-up comic. And you might say, Joe, that's stupid. It's like, no, the mindset of a stand-up comic is to always be looking for the humor in life, whether it's the most minute, the Jerry Seinfelds of the world, or the larger, broad issues like a Dave Chappelle. So having that sort of mindset of just constantly being on. So Merle, I came from, I spent 20 years working morning radio in New York City, and my life 24/7 was looking for story ideas, looking for content ideas. And I think that's why you see a lot of trouble with people in the content space, where they just don't have that switch. They think like, oh, I'll just sit down and I'll come up with an idea. And like, you can't just turn that on. And I think the same goes with innovation. That switch has to be on all day and all night.
That is really well said, and that's a great example. I've never heard those two examples before, but those are great examples because you and I see the same everyday things every day as those comedians, but yet they see it differently. They're looking for it, and as a result, they see it and they turn it into humor, and the rest of us, are oblivious to it
Yeah.
until they tell us.
Right, until they tell us, and they tell a good joke, and then we're laughing. Like, oh, why didn't we think of that? Like, I'm sure, bro, you do that all the time, where you're watching something on the news or something on TV, like, Oh my God, that's just so obvious. And again, let's talk about that. Like sometimes innovation is pretty obvious, just like a stand-up comics joke is like, oh wait a minute, anyone could have told that joke, but that comic came up with it, or anyone could have come up with an initiative or a product. And sometimes it's just all about just being in the moment, right?
Yeah. You make a very good point because, and that's one thing we try to point out to people is after the fact, they'll look at an innovation, they'll say, oh yeah, that should have been obvious, or I should have thought of that. So what that means is innovations are not necessarily things that only one unique individual could have the ability to look at and figure out. Everybody can be in that role because they're all after the fact, they're all obvious. They're almost all of them obvious. They say, well, I should have thought of that, or I could have maybe thought of that if I was really thinking about it. So that's why we really focus on in organizations changing the mindset to to understanding that everyone in the entire organization can be innovative. It can be creative and innovative. Everyone. And some of the best ideas come from the people you would least expect. But you have to have a mindset, and it has to be built into that culture that you believe that your ideas should be coming from everyone, everywhere, all the time.
That's good. That's good stuff. It's funny because if you think about like the obvious technical, like even just in our lifetime, just Facebook and the iPhone, like so obvious, they actually kind of existed in other forms, whether it's MySpace, Friendster, when it comes to Facebook, or when it came to the iPhone, there were already mobile smartphones out there. Yet they found that and they took the innovations to the next level, obviously.
Steve Jobs, and Apple didn't invent a lot of these technologies that went into the iPhone. He just saw them, saw how they could be put together, and created this thing called iPhone. And so they didn't even invent hardly any of the technologies, if any of them, and yet they created the innovation.
Yeah. All right. So I mentioned AI earlier, and we are now legally obligated, Merle, to discuss AI because we're on a business podcast. How does this? Well, let me ask the timeline of the book because you got the book coming out now. But when you started writing the book, because I know ChatGPT went sort of mainstream November of 23. When did you start writing this book, and then when did you realize the importance of including AI into it?
I started writing this book years ago. It's just been kind of in the background. It's things I just kept adding to, and it took some time because I really wanted to do a lot of experimentation. And I was blessed with some clients who were open to some experimentation where we really developed these ideas of how to take something that normally you see in the entrepreneurial world and how do you convert them into the corporate world. So it took a long time, but getting back to your question, AI is a technology. And so technology has always played a role in innovation. And some companies are really quite good at innovation through constant development and improvement of technology. So I don't focus much in the book on technology because that's always been a major source of innovation, and some companies have gotten quite good at it. The thing is, what I try to show companies is that innovation doesn't have to come just from new technology. You can do everything from innovating your business model to some major new strategies to major new directions that you're going and stuff that just like Steve Jobs, he didn't invent those technologies, but he saw them and realized how they could be configured in a different way. The same is true with AI. It's a technology out there, and it's not going to be the people who are. There's a few people who are going to be actually inventing and constantly improving the technology, but the innovators are going to be the ones to see it and see how to use it in a variety of different ways. And the number of ways looks like is almost infinite with this technology.
Yeah, I was hoping maybe you can help me with some, Earl, because you're obviously a lot smarter than I am. I drive my friends and coworkers crazy with the quote, "I don't want to do something for the sake of doing it." I don't know why I have this. It's part of my DNA, Merle. Like when I do something, I want to do it for the 100%. Or when people say, "I did 120%," but I want to do it because it means something. I don't want to do things for the sake of doing it. And I feel like innovation and even AI can fall into that trap, because what will happen is you'll have a boss who maybe, and one of the jokes is when I talk to a lot of CEOs, they say the worst day for their employees is the day they get back from vacation, because they're afraid of what book they might have written and what rules he's going to start implementing in the company. But the idea of doing it for the sake of doing it, like innovate for the sake of innovate, and using AI for the sake of innovation, for the sake of AI. What's your thoughts on that? Because I feel like that's a major problem, and it kind of connects to our earlier part of the discussion about, project management and checking boxes. You're doing it just because you're doing it. Tell me about that. Am I crazy for having this concept of doing things for the sake of doing things?
I don't believe so. I think I'm a lot the same way. So just getting back to your example of AI, I've experimented with AI. I utilize AI for small, short things. I don't use it as much right now for, my key writing, because I've found that AI has so AI has some people who are trying to utilize my book and do some AI, write some AI blogs from it. I've told them there's going to be two challenges. One is, a lot of the stuff in my book is brand new. It's not out there, and AI relies on all this universe of information out there for its intelligence. And if something is new and it hasn't seen it before, it's not going to be aware of it. Second thing, and this, I'm really showing my age now, but a certain amount of the principles in my book came from thought leaders from 30, 40 years ago. And they had brilliant stuff that was kind of recognized at the time, but has now been forgotten. So I have a lot of that in the book as well. And that's, beyond the time that stuff is out on the universe, the internet universe for the AI. So AI, I agree with you. AI just for the sake of AI doesn't necessarily get you something. Uh, but there's no question that I will be, in the next book that I write, I'm going to be utilizing it. I just am learning how to actually train it and actually make it useful versus just doing it for the sake of doing it.
Nice. Well, good. I feel like we're long lost brothers, Merle. All right. On the subject, I want to finish on something you kind of just mentioned in your next book, but magic wand. I know it's too late because the book is out to the world, Merle. If you could add one more chapter to this book, maybe it's something after you got that book in the mail for the first time, like, I should have put this in there. If you could have add one more chapter, what do you think it would have been about?
Well, the people that have now read the book and gotten back to me, the one thing they raise is the whole issue of change management, and it's something I only touch on in the book, but I know that innovation, major transformations, major reinventing yourself kinds of things, there's huge issues in change management, because that is, humans are just naturally averse to change, and it's so but my book was already longer than what Forbes books told me. In this day and age, you're already twice what most books are. So I took that. I actually had started down that path, but I took it out. But it's something I'll try to address in some later book. But that's the one thing that really hasn't been touched on in that book, which everybody that follows this stuff is going to run into.
Yeah. Well, if the book's already a hit, Merle, and you know what people do sometimes, they'll put out a second edition, and you could probably throw that on in the 2.0 of the book, right?
I could if Forbes will let me. I'm just kidding. They've been extremely helpful on this stuff.
The name of the book is The Innovation Edge: How Large Companies Lose It and How to Get It Back. His name is Merle Symes. Merle, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. I really enjoyed it.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Merle and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.